Tonight you're going to eat something. Maybe a bowl of pasta, maybe a piece of grilled chicken and a salad. You might feel a flicker of guilt about the carbs. You might tell yourself that somewhere back in your evolutionary past, your ancestors ate nothing but meat. But the real answer is far stranger. Your ancestors weren't eating steak around a campfire every night. They weren't following a diet plan at all. They were opportunists. They were foragers. And what they actually put in their mouths would probably surprise you more than any modern food trend. Let's start with the myth. For the last 2 decades, a very specific story has taken hold in gyms and grocery stores and best-selling books. The story goes like this. Humans evolved as hunters. Meat made us smart. Grains and starches are a recent, unnatural addition. Something farming forced onto bodies that were never built for it. It's a clean story. It's satisfying. It also isn't quite true. Anthropologist Catherine Milton spent years studying the diets of wild primates and modern hunter-gatherers, and her research pointed somewhere else entirely. Across most hunter-gatherer societies she examined, plant foods weren't a side dish. They were the backbone of the diet. Roots, tubers, fruits, nuts. Meat mattered, and it mattered a lot when it was available. But availability was the problem. You can't run down an antelope every day. You can dig up a tuber almost any day. So what does that mean for your body? It means your ancestors needed a way to unlock energy from foods that weren't meat. And that's where the story gets interesting. Deep in your saliva right now, there's an enzyme called amylase. Its job is simple. It starts breaking down starch the moment food touches your tongue. Chew a piece of bread for long enough, and it will start to taste sweet. That's amylase at work, converting starch into sugar before it even reaches your stomach. Here's the strange part. Humans have far more copies of the amylase gene than our closest primate relatives. Something in our evolutionary past selected hard for the ability to digest starchy foods efficiently. Researcher Amanda Henry examined dental plaque from Neanderthal remains, tiny fossilized deposits on ancient teeth, and found microscopic starch granules trapped inside. Cooked starch granules, which means Neanderthals, not just modern humans, were processing and eating roots and tubers and grains long before agriculture existed, long before anyone was farming anything. Think about that for a second. The food group most associated with modern comfort eating, with guilt, with diet culture villainy, may have been fueling brain growth in our ancestors for hundreds of thousands of years. Why does this matter so much? Because your brain is expensive. It burns through roughly 20% of your daily energy despite being about 2% of your body weight. That's an enormous metabolic cost. Somewhere in human evolution, a species had to find a reliable, dense source of fuel to pay that bill. Meat helped. Fire helped even more, because cooking unlocks calories that raw food keeps locked away. But so did starch. Steady, storable, diggable starch. Now here's where the story bends again. In the early 2000s, researcher Herman Poncer traveled to Tanzania to study the Hadza, one of the last populations on Earth still living substantially by hunting and gathering. He expected, like most scientists at the time, that their active lifestyle would mean they burned dramatically more calories per day than sedentary people in wealthy nations. He was wrong. When Poncer measured actual daily energy expenditure using doubly labeled water, a technique that tracks calorie burn with remarkable precision, the numbers came back almost identical to office workers in the United States and Europe. Same total calories burned per day, despite the Hadza walking for miles, digging, climbing, carrying. How is that possible? The current explanation is that human bodies are remarkably good at compensating. Burn more energy on physical activity, and other systems, things like inflammation and stress hormones, quietly dial down to keep the total roughly constant. Your body isn't a simple calorie in, calorie out machine. It's a negotiation. It's constantly trying to keep your total energy budget stable, no matter how you spend the hours in your day. Why should that unsettle you? Because it means the ancient story wasn't really about a specific menu. It wasn't about eating like a caveman or avoiding a particular food group or reverse engineering some mythical original diet. It was about variability. Ancient humans ate meat when meat was there. They ate roots and tubers and fruit and insects and shellfish and marrow and eggs, depending entirely on the season and the land.
A hunter-gatherer near the coast in prehistoric Southeast Asia might have lived largely on fish and shellfish. A group in the Arctic ate almost entirely animal fat and protein because plants simply weren't available most of the year. A community in the savanna might have relied heavily on tubers and seasonal fruit, supplementing with meat only when a hunt succeeded. Each of these groups was technically eating the ancestral human diet. None of them were eating the same thing. So what was actually consistent across all of them? Diversity, adaptability, an eating pattern that shifted constantly based on what the land offered, rather than a fixed formula stamped into your DNA. Your body wasn't built around a specific ratio of macronutrients. It was built around flexibility, the ability to run on fat one season and starch the next and protein the season after that, switching fuel sources the way a hybrid engine switches between gas and electric. That flexibility is still inside you right now. Your body can run efficiently on carbohydrate-heavy meals or fat-heavy meals. It can adapt to feast and famine, to abundance and scarcity, because that's what it spent millions of years practicing. The rigid rulebook sold to you today, the idea that there's one correct ancestral way to eat, misunderstand the very thing that made your ancestors successful. It wasn't a diet. It was the capacity to eat almost anything and thrive. And there's a deeper twist hiding underneath all of this. The foods our ancestors ate weren't chosen, they were found. Every meal was the result of what the environment happened to offer that week, filtered through cooperation, through shared knowledge, passed down about which roots were safe and which berries were poison and which animals were worth the risk of the hunt. Eating wasn't an individual choice made in a kitchen. It was a communal problem solved together, generation after generation, by people who couldn't afford to get it wrong. Which brings you back to tonight's dinner. When you sit down to eat, you're standing at the end of an unbroken chain of decisions stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. Decisions about which roots to dig, which fires to build, which foods were worth the risk of trying. Your amylase genes are still there, ready to break down that pasta the moment it touches your tongue. Your metabolism is still negotiating, still balancing, still doing exactly what it did on the savanna and in the Arctic and along ancient coastlines. You were never built to eat one specific ancient diet. You were built to eat almost anything and to thrive anyway.